No country ever came from the hand of its creator more eminently qualified to be the abode of a thriving and numerous population. That's how Oliver Fry, New South Wales Commissioner for Crown Lands, glowingly described the Upper Richmond Valley in 1844. A description that sparks a migration of colonial settlers, first sheep and cattle farmers, then timber getters and dairy farmers, to establish the community now known as Kyogle. When football teams choose a symbolic name, they look for qualities such as strength, speed, agility and courage. Kyogle's football team is called the Turkeys. A brave call, but it honours the history of the region going back thousands of years. Kyogle gets its name from the local Aboriginal language. It's said to be the egg of the plains or brush turkey. It's a name now literally cemented in concrete for all to see as you enter the town. The Bundjalung nation are believed to have arrived in the Northern Rivers area at least 12,000 years ago, the Kyogle tribe settling in the area from Runnymede to the Queensland border. It was said to be some of the most fertile country on the continent, the richest hunting and fishing grounds. When white settlers arrived in the Kyogle area a mere 200 years ago, they estimated the Aboriginal population was about 600. They described them as physically impressive, muscular, sinewy, and of good athletic build. White settlement began in the early 1820s when Sir John Jamieson, an Irish-born physician, banker and pastoralist, and one of the wealthiest and biggest landowners in the colony, established the Richmond Head Run, a grazing property which covered just over 12,500 hectares. After his death, Richmond Head was sold to two other Irishmen, Henry Mayne and Charles Fawcett, who renamed it Fairymount. Names still synonymous with the town. Fairymount overlooks the eastern side of the town, and Fawcett's Creek runs through the northern side of the town into the Richmond River. By the 1840s, there were 7 cattle stations on the Upper Richmond: Fairymount, Wyangri, Rosebery, Unumgar, Ettrick, Dirrabba and Runnymede. The name Kyogle did not appear officially until the 1860s. Alexander McKellar bought Fairymount in 1854 and officially changed the name of his cattle station to Kyogle in 1867, although a variation appears on his marriage certificate 3 years earlier, the first recorded use of the name. What brought the white settlers to the Kyogle district in numbers was red gold, cedar.
The cedar getters were the first to head into the Richmond River in 1842, and by the time they got to Kyogle it was 1862.
No one knows more about the timber history of Kyogle than Doug Campbell. He spent a lifetime in Kyogle's timber industry and 3 years researching its history, even before the arrival of the white cedar getters.
All the messages right up to Cairns and north of Cairns were sent on the spurs of trees, and because cedar trees grew everywhere on the coast, from this side of Narra to the tip of Queensland, that's how the message was sent. And on a clear day, a message could travel up to 10 miles.
Cedar was a valuable resource. It was Australia's first export industry. The timber was being shipped to India for the wealthy English plantation owners. At its peak, there were no fewer than 40 teamsters hauling cedar out of the forests in the Kyogle area. They hauled them out by bullock wagons to the edge of the Richmond River to wait for a flood to float them downstream to Casino and as far as Coracai. There they'd be collected and shipped off by schooner. It was dangerous, sometimes fatal work, not only for the cedar cutters.
The first big cedar buyer got drowned at the entrance of Richmond River and Fawcett's Creek. They rowed out in a little rowing boat. He sent a young fellow back and a young fellow with him on the logs, and when the fellow got back in the boat, he looked around and the boss from Victoria, the cedar buyer, was gone. He's the first person drowned in Kyogle.
Felled logs were also hauled by bullock wagon, an arduous 2-week journey for the teamsters. That continued until timber mills were established locally, a major industry then, as now, for the Kyogle area. The first established in the area was at Deep Creek near Malanganing. No one's sure exactly when it was set up, but it was advertising hoop pine boards in the Casino newspaper as early as 1881. Ultimately, there would be no fewer than 57 sawmills, 4 veneer factories, including 2 making plywood locally. Timber getters were itinerant workers. They were allowed to cut timber from Crown lands, but forbidden to settle on the land. So they established camps, cut the timber, and when it was exhausted, moved on to the next stand. The red gold rush came to an end toward the end of the century. Thousands of trees had been felled over 30 years, although cedar was still being cut until after the Second World War. But the value of cedar crashed in the 1890s. There are a number of factors, including the Great Depression of 1893 and competition from imported American mahogany. Despite the downturn for cedar, the timber industry not only survived, but thrived. The forests around Kyogle contained even more vast stands of hoop pine and spotted gum, timber that was needed for houses and commercial buildings.
Well, they could cut it easier than hardwood. So all the houses originally were all built out of hoop pine floors, and if you pull the carpet up or the coverings off a hoop pine floor and sand it, it comes up a magnificent floor.
The dawning of the 20th century saw the dawning of Kyogle. Kyogle Station was surveyed and subdivided. In November 1903, 6,500 acres of farming blocks, 150 to 300 acres each, were sold on the first day. Town allotments were offered for sale in October 1904. Within the next 2 years, the whole estate was sold. Over the next decade, the estates of Wyangri, Bundjalung and Bundjalung were subdivided and sold. This was the birth of Kyogle and surrounding villages, and farming was the catalyst for it to thrive.
It all changed when the turn of the century, about 1901, 102, the stations were sold, and the new owners subdivided them into smaller lots for dairying, and the dairying really took off. The first factory, butter factory, was built in 1905. They had 45 suppliers. In 1915, they had 300 suppliers. It really took off. They built little factories at Kyogle, at Daraba, Wyangri, Ettrick. When the roads got better and better road transport, they closed those factories down, and they basically came into Kyogle. That made the Kyogle factory a fairly big factory. That provided a big emphasis for the town to really get going, and things moved fairly quickly. The town grew.
At its peak, there were more than 500 dairy farms in the Kyogle area. Today, there are a fraction of that number.
I would say less than 30. They either sold out or were bought up by adjoining farms to have a more substantial income. Others went into beef cattle, so they bought farms too. So you had a bigger beef farm, you had a bigger dairy farm. And those farms that are left, they're pretty good farmers. They've got good, better cattle, better genetics, they're feeding them better, and they're doing a better job.
Dairy industry also went hand in hand with the pig industry. Pigs were transported to market, sometimes in carts like this, sometimes on foot, all the way to Beaudesert. As the dairy and pig industries expanded, the Kyogle butter factory soon had a new neighbour, a bacon curing factory. The town was going ahead. According to a Postal Department inspector's report in 1905, there were already 600 people living within a mile of Kyogle's post office, and according to the report, the town was rapidly expanding. At one stage, Kyogle had 7 banks looking after the economic needs of the growing community. Agriculture was the driving force to grow and multiply, industries that complemented and supported each other. Now was the time to move forward, but transport was often literally bogged down. The town's wide main streets, built to accommodate timber hauling bullock wagons, was often turned into a quagmire. They even used packing cases to provide some protection for pedestrians crossing the muddied streets. To manage heavy rains and floods, bridges were built and roads were improved. But what they really needed was a railway. The railway line from Casino to Kyogle was opened in 1910 to great fanfare and celebration. But there was an even greater need: a railway line north from Kyogle to Brisbane. A Royal Commission was assured that the value of the timber carried on the line alone would be greater than the cost of the railway. What stood in the way was the border ranges, a steep barrier for steam-powered trains. The radical solution was to construct what became known as the spiral loop, an engineering marvel that allowed trains to spiral through the mountain twice through 3 tunnels, the longest 1,160 metres, and cross over itself to gain 20 metres in height. Locals began campaigning in 1912, but it would take another 14 years of agitating and lobbying before the first sod was turned. The 98 miles of railway took 4 years to build, employing 1,500 men at the height of the Depression. Not only would it give Kyogle valuable access to the Queensland market, it had national significance, providing fast, efficient access for trade from Brisbane to Adelaide. On September 27, 1930, the train for the first historic journey arrived in Kyogle to what was described as a wildly excited crowd. In Brisbane, it was also celebrated with pomp and pageantry. This was history in the making. It was also to be a decisive moment for one trader. Draper Sam Michael moved to Kyogle when he heard that the train line went from Sydney to Brisbane via Kyogle. He assumed that this would mean that this would become a big, important place. Important, but never big. The district's population has never risen to more than 10,000. As the timber industry had played a major role in creating and supporting the growth of Kyogle, it would also have tragic consequences. Fires destroyed many of the buildings in the town's main street in the 1920s and 30s. Because timber was so plentiful, it was natural that the houses and commercial premises, from banks to boarding houses, would be built of locally grown and milled timber. Bizarrely, those fires had a beneficial legacy. When the premises were rebuilt, they were constructed wisely in stone, and significantly in the architectural style called Art Deco that was all the rage in Western Europe and the United States: bold, stylised geometric patterns and rich colours. The Art Deco Walk, 14 locations, and one of the best examples of Art Deco streetscape in Australia. Another legacy of those fires gave Kyogle its first water supply, not just to provide safe, clean drinking water, but to fight fires.
Originally the water supply was put in the 1930s, primarily in response to some major fires in the main street area. The town felt that they needed a town water supply more for fire protection than they did for drinking water.
The Richmond River provides the town with its water supply, but over the decades it has caused even more disasters and tragedy. The town, built at the junction with Fawcett's Creek, was at the mercy of floods. A cyclone in February 1954 dumped massive amounts of rain across the McPherson Range into the headwaters of the Richmond River, Grady's Creek and Fawcett's Creek. It created the biggest natural disaster the town had ever seen. In Kyogle alone, 10 people died. 10 houses were swept away and a further 159 were damaged by floodwaters. Hardest hit was the Flat, the low-lying area just below the railway station. From here, people watched helplessly as the raging flood took its terrible toll.
So that particular day, the 20th, we spent nearly all day on the railway station looking at the water rising and seeing what was happening. The people on the Flat had been asked on several occasions to move out and come up to higher ground, which many of them did.
Tragically, not all did. 3 people from one family, 7 from another perished.
Their house moved off with 7 people on the roof, and it floated off down past Norco. Grandma in that family, she ended up in a tree down behind the hospital. She was found or heard that night calling out for help, and the next day, when possible, people could get out there, she was then rescued. The rest of the family, unfortunately, did not survive.
It was the worst, but not the last. The town has suffered more than a dozen inundations since then.
The town's got a long history of flooding and some tragic events, some major damage that's happened over many years. And over the last couple of years we've built this floodway you can see behind us, which combined with a levee bank provides a modified flood behaviour. So that allows the water from Fossett's Creek, which is on my right, to get into the Richmond River, which is on my left, much earlier in a flooding event, lowers the peak flood levels, and it also means that the flat area where a lot of the damage has happened over past floods is flooded through backwater flooding rather than fast, deep moving water to provide some protection for the residents in that area.
Kyogle Council invested $9.5 million providing flood protection and at the same time upgrading the town's water supply with a 200 million litre off-stream storage to provide clean water even in drought. There's even a fish ladder, an innovative award-winning design that allows fish to move upstream into the Richmond River catchment and access to 300 to 400 kilometres of habitat that wasn't available to them before. Agriculture has been and always will be the main social and economic driver for Kyogle, but the district with its string of surrounding villages is attracting people for its lifestyle. After 2 decades of population decline, there are signs the district is moving forward again. Growth and change are happening, slowly but surely. Kyogle lies at the foot of World Heritage listed national parks and promotes itself as the gateway to the rainforests. Where once timber getters cut down and hauled out thousands of cedar and hoop pine trees, tourists are now providing new income attracted by the majesty of the living forests. But the timber industry is still alive and well in Kyogle. 150 years after the first trees were felled, it remains a vital part of the district's economy, although today there are only 2 sawmills operating, Hogan's and Hereford's. The timber industry survived by changing with the times and technology. So too has the dairy industry. At the Risk, 19 kilometres north of Kyogle, the Wilson family has been dairying since 1869. 5th generation dairy farmer Tony Wilson has moved with the times with a robotic dairy.
It's been a challenging experience, to say the least, to put them in.
The cows are now milked and fed by computer-controlled machinery.
The laser scans the teats and couples that information with previous information of where the teat placement is, and then applies each teat appropriately one at a time. And as the cows each quarter empties, that cup's removed. Whilst she's getting milked, she's also given her ration of pellets, which is all determined by the computer on how long she's been away and how much milk she gave us yesterday, and it'll adjust that quantity to the gram. So it's a very pleasant experience for the cow.
The robotic dairy is not just about milking cows. The Wilsons have value added, turning it into a tourist attraction, a sign of where Kyogle is heading.
So the main industry in the region is still the agricultural industry and the associated services that go with it. And on the back of that is, I guess, a new and emerging market, which is the agri-tourism, whether it just be through farm stays or through tours of things like the robot dairy around town, or just to be able to showcase the food in itself through cafes, through long lunches, and just through promotion of the food itself and the end product. And there's some real growth in industries and opportunities around that. And then obviously with that goes all of those secondary businesses that would support those type of industries.
Kyogle is still a town with no traffic lights, no rush hour. It takes about 10 minutes to walk the length of the main street, much longer if you stop and talk to everyone you know. It has a sense of community, of lifestyle, and that could be the key to its future.
Well, look, I think we've turned a corner. The standard of the infrastructure around us is getting better every year, and we're seeing people's way of life improving, and that sense of community that a village such as Kyogle brings, I think, is getting harder to find and becoming a little bit rarer in the society that that's growing around us, and particularly in those metropolitan areas. At the moment, they're mostly day trippers. They're having a look around, or they're on their way somewhere else, but eventually Kyogle will be the destination that they're seeking.
Kyogle never reached the potential to become, as Commissioner Oliver Fry predicted in 1844, the abode of a thriving and numerous population, or as Draper Sam Michael felt it would become, a very important place. But as his son, I know it was a decision he and many others never regretted.